So in this lesson, I want to talk about camera movement and whether you should or shouldn't move the camera. Now that's, again, one of those personal choice things. And when I first started out, I believed that your camera should always be moving. There should always be a little bit of movement, something going on. But then I went and shot for a company, and the guy, Marcus, I love him. He trained me phenomenally well in some really interesting techniques. So one of those techniques is shooting handheld. And handheld, one of the big challenges is no matter how stable you think your hands are always going to be a little bit wobbly. And the other challenge comes in is when you're shooting with a DSLR, it's not designed to be handheld and held steady. You know, with bigger cameras, you've actually got it on your shoulder, so that's, you know, much better supported, and you can hold it steady on your shoulder and so on. The key to holding a camera steady is to have as many points of contact with your body and the camera. So for example, if I'm just holding it like this out from my body, my elbows, everything's kind of moving around. It's a bit of a mess, really. So to begin with, you want to bring your elbows into your body. So fold your elbows into your body so your arms are less likely to wobble around. Then normally I have my one hand over here, my other hand under the lens so that I can be doing cool little focus pulls, and then I'll have it tucked in to my nose, and then my face will also be tucked in. I'll probably take my glasses off. I'll probably slam my face into there. So I've actually got 1, 2, 3, 4 points of contact with the camera, and then I can hold it pretty darn steady to get those nice and steady shots. Now, even though I'm holding it pretty steady like this, if I start moving, you're going to get some wobble. So one of the most important lessons that I learned is what you can do to still have movement in your shot but not move the camera is stand still and let your subjects move within the frame. Obviously you could do that with a tripod, but it's a matter of carrying the tripod around. And if you can't do that, like for example if you're doing events, you might want to just be run and gun and very lightweight and not sort of have a big setup to intimidate people. This is fantastically not intimidating, and it's very easy actually with a little bit of practice to hand hold and keep it fairly steady. The other thing you can look at is shooting in 4K, and the advantage of shooting in 4K is you can actually stabilize your footage in post. The thing is, when it does stabilize your footage in post, what it does is it actually crops in on the footage a little bit and then sort of tries to hold it and lets the outer edges of the video kind of wobble. But you need to shoot wider than what you're expecting so that when it crops, you've still not lost that much resolution or that much quality when it crops in order to stabilize in post. Another thing you can do to get sort of like a little bit of a slider movement is to just move with your hips. So hold your body really, really steady and just use your hips to move your body left and right or backwards and forwards to try and get a little bit of movement. Now again, you are going to get some wobble, but if you think about it, when you're shooting these sorts of shots, generally it's for B-roll. And B-roll, you're never going to use more than 5 to 10 seconds of the shot. So as long as you can get 5 to 10 seconds, that's fairly stable. That's all you'll really need. And in fact, if you're shooting at a higher frame rate, let's say you're shooting at 50 frames per second or 100 frames per second, well, now you only need to get 2 seconds at 100 frames per second, and that's actually 8 to 10 seconds of B-roll. So you just need 2 seconds of not, you know, shaking like that, and you're golden. So that's looking at doing some handheld techniques. Now, what about using machinery to help keep your camera steady? The first thing we look at is obviously a tripod. And when you're using a video tripod, you're going to have what's called a fluid head most of the time. And a fluid head gives you resistance against the weight of the camera, and then you can do these beautiful fluid shots. So for example, your typical shot is going to be a pan, which is left and right, so just moving the camera left and right and revealing a scene, which is generally what a pan is going to be used for. Then you've also got a tilt, which is pretty much a vertical pan, and we're just going to move the camera up and down. You can pan and tilt at the same time, so a little bit of from the side and then up and reveal things and all that kind of jazz, pretty straightforward. So those are your basic movements. Then we get into some really cool toys. So the first one we're going to look at is a slider. And a slider is, back in the days we used to have things called dollies, and what that was, it was like a little train basically that you put the camera on tracks, and you would move the camera along. And the moves you could do, for example, you could do a slide from left to right. You could pull in or push back from a scene, which is pretty cool. And you know, those dollies were pretty big and clunky. Nowadays, you've got these little sliders you can get where you get that little bit of movement anyway, and you don't have to carry this whole thing. One bit of advice when you're looking at sliders, look for one that's got a little bit of resistance, because if it's very loose, it's very difficult to handhold and do a smooth movement. If there's a little bit of resistance against you pushing it, that's going to make it easier for you to get that smooth movement. The other thing to look at, and something that I invested in, is getting a slider with a motion control unit. So I've actually got this bit of machinery that attaches to my slider that moves the slider along for me, and that guarantees that I get consistent smooth movement when I'm doing slider shots. The other bit of gear that people are getting pretty excited about, and to be fair, I've bought and played around with quite a few of these and I really like them, is gimbals. Now what a gimbal is that it puts your camera into this sort of harness, and then it's got motors that will control your pitch, your yaw, and your tilt, and all these other movements, and basically you can hold the camera steady and you can move the gimbal around and the camera will still be steady. What this is really great for is for walking shots. So you can actually follow someone with your camera and the camera will be fairly smooth, because your natural walk is, you're going to bounce. If you try and hold a camera and walk following someone, you're going to sort of do that and it's less than pleasant. Whereas if you put it on a gimbal, you can follow them either with a two-handed or a one-handed gimbal, and you can do some really amazing shots. You can also get some beautiful reveals. So back in the day, we used to use a thing called a jib, which was basically like a little crane that you'd put the camera on the jib and you'd lift it up and you'd get this beautiful rising up shot and it would reveal. Nowadays, you can just put it on a gimbal, rise the shot up and get pretty much the same effect. If you want to get extra smooth, you can put your gimbal on a jib and go to town with that. Now you can get a whole bunch of different gimbals. The two main styles that you can get are the double-handed ones, which you hold like this, and then there's the single pistol grip ones. The double-handed ones are probably easier to manage because, again, you've got more points of contact and you can hold it with two hands. Also, those generally will allow you to put heavier weights on them. You're limited mostly in these gimbals with the amount of weight that they can carry. So most of the pistol grip ones will allow you to carry up to about 1.2 kilograms. There's a new one that I just got which will hold 2.5 kilograms, which is pretty amazing. But your general average one is going to be 1 to 1.2, 1.5 kilograms there or thereabouts, which will hold most DSLRs with a smaller or lighter lens. The other thing to look at is the lens that you want to use on these gimbals generally is going to be a wider lens, because you're not going to use a zoom, because the more, like if you're shooting at 200 millimeters on a gimbal, that's still going to be a little bit shaky. So you want wides, you want to follow people, get the whole scene with these things. You're not going to use it for tight close-up shots majority of the time. If you are looking to do like macro shots, so let's say for example you're doing some product shots and you want to get some nice movement around the product, I would suggest using a slider with some motion control for those, because that's going to give you more precise sort of zoomed in and it's not going to be all wobbly. So that's, yeah, for those I'd definitely go with a slider. Going back to the gimbals, when you get onto the two-handed ones, now this isn't a rule, some of the two-handed ones are also limited to about 1 kg, but you can get bigger ones that can hold up to 3 kilograms, 5 kilograms, 7 kilograms. Now before you get all excited about these cool toys, and they are very cool toys, keep in mind that weight is important to consider. So for example, when I was looking at getting one of these, I was looking at one that could hold 7 kilograms, which would have held my FS7, which would have been amazing. But I sort of stopped and thought about it and went, well, the gimbal itself weighs about 2 kilograms. The FS7, when it's all rigged up with a monitor and everything that I need to put on there, is about 5 to 7 kilograms. So that means I'm just holding 9 to 10 kilograms in my hands out like this. Pick up 2 5-kilogram weights and just hold them like that. You're not going to be able to hold it for a very long time. Now, fair enough, the shots that you're getting are probably not longer than 30 to 40 seconds. So, you're pushing record, you're picking it up, you're doing the shot, you're doing the shot, you're doing the shot, you're doing the shot, you put it down. Trust me, the weight builds up. So the double-handed one that I've got is a Came TV Argo, and that can hold 3.6 kgs. And I would just mount something like my A7S and, a decent sized lens, maybe the Sony 16-35. So you're looking at a total weight package of maybe 4 kilograms. So not even that heavy compared to the giant ones. And let me tell you, after a day of shooting with that, my arms are really aching. So that is something that you definitely want to consider when you're looking at getting one of these toys. Keep in mind the weights and how you're going to be able to afford that, as well as the gym membership that gets you to use the weight. Now you can get these really cool things called an Atlas or an Easy Rig, and what it is sort of it ties to your waist and then a piece of metal goes above your head and a piece of string, so it moves the center of Does it move the center of gravity? No, it moves the weight from just on your arms. It balances out between your arms and your core. So your core is holding it up as well as your arms, so it takes a bit of strain off of your arms. But folks, we're getting deep into the weeds here, and you don't need to. All you need to know in terms of this course is if you want a hand hold it like this, elbows in, up against your face, up against your eye, you're good to go. And otherwise, invest in a tripod that's got a fluid head. You can probably get a cheap Manfrotto or Benro for about $500-700 from B&H. Get started with that, and then let's talk about gimbals in a more advanced lesson. And that's a quick look at camera movement.